So good morning all of the speakers and the participants. Welcome all of you to VFT Zone International Convention 2021. And my name is Ngon and also Miss Zhang. We will all the moderators during the event today. And joining the event, I would like to welcome our speaker, Mr. William Lewis as well. He is the Virtual English Language Fellow, the Regional English Language Office, and in the US mission in Vietnam. Before we move on, I would like to give you the big thanks for your participation. And I hope that all of you can enjoy the program, can gain a lot of knowledge as well as experience from our speaker. And also, if you have any questions for our honor speaker, you can give in the chat box so that we are easier to collect and to send it to our speaker at the end of the program so that you will receive the answers from him. All right, and I will not let you wait further. So now please welcome our speaker in the workshop with the name Project-Based Language Learning from Theory to Practice. Warmly welcome, Mr. William Lewis.
Thank you all, in particular to the moderators for all of your support, and hello to everybody who's here. It's nice to see a good crowd. So good morning, I think for most, if it is the afternoon or evening, then good evening and afternoon, wherever you might be. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get started here. Okay, I think this should be the right screen. So yes, this is project-based learning from theory to practice. My name is William, and I'm currently the academic director at ILSC Seoul in South Korea, where I am sitting at the moment. But I was a virtual English language fellow earlier this year at Ho Chi Minh University of Technology and Education, which is somewhat how I end up here today. To give a preview, we will begin, as the title promises, with a little bit of theory about project-based learning, a bit of an overview, discuss how students learn using this framework, and discuss the question of whether it actually works. And I'll present the kind of step-by-step process for implementing this teaching strategy. Then we'll move into practice. I'll share a real-life example in some details, and we'll discuss some of the challenges and recommendations for using this. And have a little time for discussion and Q&A at the end. Given that it's a workshop, I hope to have some interaction along the way. And with that in mind, we'll actually begin with a little bit of interaction at the start here. I have a Kahoot survey just to get your experience and ideas about project-based learning. So hopefully everybody's familiar with Kahoot. It's a fairly simple tool to use. But what I will do now is share a different screen so that we can get everybody logged into this activity. There's just 5 quick questions. Of course, it is taking a moment to load. Okay, here we go. If you go to, you can join on your phone or on any web browser. If you go to Kahoot, Kahoot.it, and you enter the game pin on the screen there. Can everybody see that, that number there? 7629957. Okay, code is coming in through here, 7629957. I'll turn the music off. It's kind of maddening. Sound great, great. All right, great. We've got 25 so far. I'll hold on for another 30 seconds or so as people join. There's just a few short questions here, but they'll help set the context a little bit and think about the topic. All right, let's go ahead and give it a try. Again, just a few short questions. Even if you have trouble with this, the rest of the presentation is the more substantial part. But we'll go ahead and get some of your ideas here. These are all survey questions, so there's no right answer.
Hi, sir. You can share the music from your laptop. It's way better.
Oh, you like the music?
Yeah.
All right. All right, 19 yes and 8 no to the question of do you use? Good, good. So a lot do, but we have some people to convince or to come over to our side. Great. So how often do you use project-based learning in your classes? Okay, so mostly some. Lots of people use them in some. A few use them in all. That's great. A few don't, and a few use them in most. Good, good. Oh, I'm sorry that the music isn't coming through. I can hear it. Okay, so lots of short ones, 1 week or less, moving up into several weeks, a few taking a few months or a whole semester. That's really great. Good. Just 2 more questions here. What do you think is the biggest challenge to using project-based learning? Okay, so cooperation and group work, yeah, that's definitely one. Although we've got some other challenges too. It can be hard to grade. Finding ideas that fit into a curriculum is challenging, and definitely some students at a lower proficiency level can struggle with this. Good. And our final question here is a multi-select, just asking why. you use projects in any of your classes. So you can pick all that apply. Okay, great. Lots of people saying important skills from project work. I completely agree. And there does seem to be an element of enjoyment. Sometimes it's required by the curriculum, it's built in. Good. All right. Well, thank you all for your participation. It's really helpful to set a little bit of the background. So with that, we can move into, and I'll begin just with an overview of project-based learning. As you've indicated in the survey, a lot of us use projects in class in some way, but a fuller version of project-based learning is a very structured and intentional framework for teaching, usually spanning weeks or possibly months, where learners work through a series of tasks to create, to achieve a goal. As an approach to teaching, it is exploratory and inquiry-based, ideally addressing real-world problems and requiring communication outside of the classroom. Because it is open-ended and complex, students will need to apply collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking skills as they work towards the goal that you've set. So at one level, I think it is a process-based approach because students are guided through a series of steps to create a product. And it is also product-based because at the end, students will have actually created something. Could be a video, a presentation, a paper, a poster, or even a performance. And that thing, that product, can be evaluated. One very key concept within project-based learning is that students have voice and choice. So students should be decision makers who help guide the process. And they should feel like they have a voice, meaning they can give their opinion and have a say about the topic and the structure and the approach that they take to completing it. And they should also have some element of choice in how they complete tasks and how they demonstrate their learning. To illustrate this with a few concrete examples of projects that I've either done or read about, students could interview foreign residents of their city and use that data to create a presentation about cultural adjustment. This would be a large task. It would take a while to structure and to work through, but we could help them do that. Students could also create video resumes and record mock interviews. So again, that's a very complex task, but it can be broken down into subparts to stretch over weeks or even longer. And the final one here is one that I've used a number of times in my teaching. I worked in US universities for much of the last 7 or 8 years, and students in their first or second semester in the US in a culture class would write a culture guide to the city that would help future students adjust to life. So it would have practical tips from things about where can you find toothpaste to where can you find comfort food to how can you do well at the university. And they would give this practical advice based on their experience, and those would be shared with future groups of students. So these are just a few of the perhaps infinite examples that do exist. So it is important that students learn, of course. And so a little bit of the theoretical background here. So how do students learn in project-based learning? First, it is an experiential learning experience. So learning is not rote or not explicitly language focused, but instead students learn by doing some task that we've set them, and then very importantly, reflecting on that experience. Our course books, grammar structures, and vocabulary sets that we're using in class should be somehow part of, but not the focus of any project-based work. We want students to extend their learning outside of the class, to engage in some way with authentic texts and situations and people outside of the classroom. So this is an important starting point for project-based learning. Other key sort of foundational concepts in second language acquisition would include input, output, and negotiation. So while students are working on their project, they'll be researching, having group discussions, conducting interviews. This should provide ample opportunity for comprehensible input, meaning language at their level. And as they are working with their peers to build this project, whatever it might be, they are having a meaning-focused conversation and communication along the way. And this, of course, extends all the way to the production of the final product. And throughout that, they will have to negotiate meaning. They will have to arrive at some conclusion. And this kind of authentic communication can be really good for learning. Finally, there is a strong connection to motivation and autonomy. And to get a little more specific about that, Dornier and Ushida in 2011 kind of broke down what it takes to create motivation and autonomy, and they discuss 4 key subcomponents. So we need a task that challenges the students but matches their ability, that has a clear goal, a clear process, and a sense of control. And I think as much as any teaching framework that I know of, project-based learning meets all of these 4 criteria. So as long as we've designed the project to be appropriate for the students, that will match their ability. The goal that we've given them is to produce some product. Again, it could be a paper, it could be a presentation, or a performance of some sort. We're guiding them through the steps. So there is a clear process. It is a big task, but it's broken down into parts. And importantly, back to voice and choice, students would have a sense of control as they're working through a project. So that's how it works in the theory. And you might be wondering, does it actually work? The short answer to this is yes, certainly I believe. But I have there have been hundreds of studies. Just a quick little representative sample here. On the slide, you'll see the learners and the tasks on the left, the result and the citation. But these have to do with very different contexts, and I think help illustrate some of the principles. So junior high students in Indonesia created family profiles and presented those to the class. So these are fairly young students, limited language, but the results of this study showed increased productive skills. So their writing and speaking improved. And it also really helped foster positive attitudes towards learning and confidence. Preteens, it can be quite hard to stand up and speak a foreign language, but anything that we can do to help foster and develop that is good. I think this study illustrates a way to use this framework with lower level students. Moving forward, Shin in 2018 studied university students in South Korea who worked through a sort of job preparation project where they recorded mock interviews and cover letters. There were a number of components of this. They had to think of the possible questions, and they had to script it all out using storyboards, and then produce these video products in groups. The study found that motivation was increased by project-based work, and it was really a function of attitude and relevance. So this was very important to the students. They were in the second half of their university study and beginning to worry, as you would, about finding a job. So they found it relevant and helpful. 2 additional studies, Kelson in 2018 had university students in Taiwan create investment portfolios and present those to the class. This required a little bit of teaching around basic sort of principles of investment, but then students work together to build this portfolio and present it to the class. And what he finds in that study is more target language use than in a traditional class activity. A traditional class activity there would mean working through a textbook, intensive reading, grammar, blank fill, and explicit language focus work. Finally, Grant in 2017 studies university students in Macau who interviewed more experienced writers about difficult aspects of writing and presented their findings. He finds in this study that it created opportunities for meaningful interactions, and the students were comfortable actually with their autonomous role. And that helped move them forward in their studies. So there are, of course, hundreds of other studies, but I think this paints a mostly positive picture for this approach to teaching. To give you a step-by-step process, Allen and Stoller's excellent article in 2005 breaks this down breaks down project-based learning into its discrete steps. So this approach begins with the students and instructors determining the theme, outcome, structure, and audience. We want as much as possible to engage students with the development of the task. We may have a broad goal in mind, but we want to help them, or we want them to help us fill in those details. So that would be the first step. Then we have a pair of steps where there's a little bit of teaching at the start around skills, strategies, and language that the students would need. And then once we think students have a sufficient grounding, we can send them out to gather information. The information would totally depend on the task, but once we've provided a background, we can send them out to do some work. The second pair of steps, once students have gathered their raw data, the foundation of this study, the instructor might want to teach them how to organize and synthesize this information. So once we provide a little bit of instruction about how they do that, students can then go out and try that. And this is a recursive process that continues to come back throughout the project. The final pair of steps would have the instructor preparing the students to present, and then the students presenting their work. Importantly, there are a few things there in step 7. So the students are presenting or submitting, but then they're getting feedback, and very importantly, they're giving feedback and reflecting on the process of doing the project. So this is the whole life cycle. And again, the Allen and Stoller article, which is in the references here, is excellent reading if you would like a little bit deeper dive on each of those. So that takes care of most of the theory. And what I'd like to do is try to bring this into the concrete with a real life example that I've recently used in Vietnam. The name of this project is Bespoke Travel Designers. And the task was for students in an American Studies class at Ho Chi Minh University of Technology and Education to plan a 2-week tour of cultural destinations in the United States. The students were roughly B2 CFR. A few of them might have been slightly higher, and a few of them might have been slightly lower. But they're studying American culture, and this project was used to supplement the main coursework. The purpose really was to allow students to explore features of culture that interest them. I also was hoping to see them apply some of the textbook concepts to the real world, and to practice higher order thinking skills, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and finally, engagement, because we are certainly in an online environment. If the work is not fun, the students have plenty of opportunities to go find more stimulating things to do. So we want them engaged. And the skills that we're really focusing on here would include things like research, synthesis, so bringing together information in a coherent framework, planning and collaboration, critical thinking, presentation, and report writing. The outcome of this project was a presentation and a written summary. So each group of 4 to 6 students presented as a group, and they wrote one summary of their tour. To illustrate this alongside Stoller and Allen's steps, you'll see the steps again are on the left side here, and the example project is on the right. So the sequence here at the beginning, students formed their own group and picked their theme, destination, and audience. Themes could include mountains, hiking, cultural destinations, foodie tours, beach vacations, but we were hoping for a coherent theme around their tour. They would pick some destinations and they would pick a target audience. The audience would be the group of people who might be interested in this. So that could include college students on a budget, honeymooners, or people with an infinite budget if they wanted, but they wanted to pair, I wanted them to pair the theme with a real life audience who would be interested in this. At the beginning, there was some teaching of skills and strategies. So we looked at models of tours from various tour companies. We read and identified language features, talked about the structure and the vocabulary that is used and the level of detail that is needed. A lot of the work that students did was just a recurring homework assignment in their free time. They worked together with their peers to build this. But to help them organize and synthesize, we had weekly workshops where they had to answer a series of guided questions and report out to the class about their progress. So hoping to see each week that there's greater definition and greater detail in their plan. Towards the end, they were given general guidelines about how to present in terms of time and detail, but I tried to focus mostly on the goal of persuading an audience. So what they really wanted to do was sell their tour to the audience that they had chosen. And for the most part, they did an excellent job in doing that. The live or recorded presentations were submitted at the end, and then there was a recap and feedback activity. So just a quick sort of learning schedule of what this looks like. This took 6 weeks in total. And this is somewhat summary based on the last slide, but basically the students are, at week 1, they're just introduced to the assignment. They begin working. By week 2, they have a theme, hopefully, and a destination, some clarity on an audience. And in class, we're beginning to teach those basic skills of how to find information, how to report out on it, and what it might look like. By week 3, groups are having a draft. They've got some ideas, but they've got some holes. And we're looking then at language and vocabulary and content and really how to communicate this. In week 4, there was a bit of intentional feedback on my part to make sure that groups were on track. And they're continuing to report out in class about their progress, the challenges that they're finding, the interesting things that they're discovering. And at that point, we're beginning to teach some elements of persuasion and how to appeal to an audience. Then by weeks 5 and 6, it's really just the final stages of getting ready to present their work. The results. The results were phenomenal. I was really impressed with the work that they completed. All of the groups picked a really coherent theme. You'll see a few of them here. Route 66 is a classic American adventure, and one group presented on the entirety of it. We had a deep dive into Hollywood and Los Angeles and Southern California. And from ocean to mountain took us across all of the islands of Hawaii. And again, I wasn't really prescriptive about how they presented it, other than to be persuasive. And I was really impressed at how well they took that goal and were able to translate it into really phenomenal work. So a moment to pause here, I think. And I wonder, what sort of problems do you anticipate if you tried to use this in your context? I will share a link in the chat where we can see everybody's answers on a word cloud. This will just take 1 second. So if you use that link there, oops, sorry. This link here, that goes to everyone. This is a very complex approach to teaching, and I've just quickly ran through a lot of information. But I think it would be helpful to think about what sort of problems do you anticipate if you tried this? So if you click on that link, you'll see the question and you'll be able to type your answer there on the screen. And they should come together in a word cloud for us. All right, so we've got some good ideas coming in. The different level between students, yes. Time is always hard. Limited time in class, definitely. Anybody else have any thoughts? What could go wrong with this? Just refresh here. Excellent. So the fixed program, language level, competence, and time, low level. How can I get all the students involved? Excellent, excellent. Students don't have enough English. Time, limited time. Good, good. Take another 30 seconds or so. Okay, great. Here's a great one on scaffolding for incompetent students. Yes, we do have to try to break this much larger task down into a number of smaller, more discrete tasks. Competence assessment, good. This is absolutely a challenge. Assessing group work. Students get confused. Yes, they do. Security. Okay, yeah, we might not know if students are actually the ones who are producing the work. Definitely. How can I get students involved? Time for planning and assessing. Yes, this does take a while to plan, for sure. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Hopefully, I think there's some line up here. So these are the challenges and some possible solutions to things that I have noticed from a few years of doing this. First, we do need the right students and the right context. So factors like maturity, previous experience with student-centered learning approaches, and language level are important considerations. I do think even at the lower levels, though, if we bring it down and make it not as complex as planning a 2-week tour, but more like creating a family profile, we can start to think about this as a framework that would actually work. The next point is one that was mentioned in the answer garden, which is what's commonly known as the free rider problem. And this is where certain students within a group will not really try at all. They will just sit back and let their peers do that, do whatever the project is, and they'll get their free ride. It's definitely a challenge, and one thing that I think helps is including both individual and group tasks. And if it's possible, you can have students evaluate their group members in some informal way. You wouldn't want to use that directly as a factor in their grade, but you would want to take it into consideration. The third point here, a lot of times project-based learning requires us to use some technology that might be new and might be unfamiliar to students. My approach when it comes to that is just to follow the heuristic of simplicity and training. So use as few tools as you can, and then just provide whatever training is needed. One common point of pushback on project-based learning is that we don't know exactly what language students learn. We don't know what grammar or what vocabulary they are learning. And this is true, it is a challenge because we've changed the focus from we're gonna study this feature of grammar to we're gonna do this task. But to drill down on that and to find a little bit of information about what students learn, we can use informal progress checks. We can teach needed structures and forms as we're going. And we can have individuals or groups submit the vocabulary and grammar that they've acquired or encountered throughout the project. So there are solutions there. Finally, a common thing that happens is that there is an overemphasis on the visual appeal. Most projects include some focus on image, and if students, that can be actually more fun for students, finding the pictures and the images and displaying them beautifully, which is appreciated for sure. But we do want to try to structure the project so that the language that they use and the communication is central, and the visual appeal is secondary. And this can most easily be done through a rubric that's carefully designed. So I hope I've allayed some concerns, but we'll have time for questions at the end as well. A few additional recommendations. As you're considering this approach or trying to use this, I think it's important to think broadly about students' wants and needs. We want to tie this, or we want to connect this to their larger goals. It could be in a subsequent semester of study, or it could be in a future stage of their life. So moving beyond just our classroom to really think broadly about what they need, and then really understanding them and what they want. Because if we can get that engagement at the beginning, things get quite a bit easier as we go. I think it's important to set very clear objectives and checkpoints. So the objective would be the product at the end, and the checkpoints might be what they need to have completed after each week or each day. But we want, insofar as it is possible, to try to allow students to work out the journey, because that is really where the learning happens, when they try to solve a problem together, or find a solution or a way forward together. That is where the negotiation is. That's where the meaning focused communication comes from. So as much as possible, we want to try to step back at that stage. And this is possible if the final objective is clear and all of the checkpoints are clear. Then students can see that task A, B, and C lead us towards this larger goal. I think it's helpful to try to find an audience or a way for students to display their work. I've always found a lot greater motivation and attention to detail if it was going to be displayed somewhere or shown to people outside of our classroom. That could be somebody in your school or your university or your high school or junior high school or elementary school, any school. It could also be the community at large if there's an area to display students' work. And then of course the internet gives us an infinite array of options for displaying students' work, but they do find it motivating, I think, when somebody other than their teacher is going to see it. I think it's important to use well-timed mini lessons to get students back on track or to keep them on track. Sometimes just a quick intervention of 10 or 15 minutes can help push them in the right direction. We don't have to think of needing 2 hours of instruction, but if we can break it into very discrete mini lessons, that can be helpful, and it also matches a little bit better with the attention span of most people. And finally, really importantly, this is an experiential learning model. So leaving time for students to give feedback on the project and to reflect on their own learning. When they're reflecting on their learning, of course, they're consolidating the things that they've taken in over the weeks or months before. And when they're giving you feedback on the project, that is excellent data for improving it for future students. And if you're in a teaching situation where you can continue to do this over the years, you can find the fourth or fifth iteration is quite a bit better than the first, because students have told you which elements work, which are clear, and which are not clear. So I'm glad that I have made it here at this time, because I want to leave plenty of time for discussion and for sharing. I see good questions in the chat, and I have a Padlet here to collect some of your thoughts, and I'm curious of a few questions, but of course you can share anything, and I'll be happy to answer not just in the next 15 or 20 minutes, but in the days or weeks to come. So I'm curious how you might apply these ideas to your own teaching context. Do you have any projects that you would like to use in class? Do you have any ideas that you're considering? And then of course, what if any questions do you have? So let's. I see great questions in the chat. And let me, here is the link to the Padlet. Hopefully that's gone through to everybody. Okay, I see good questions in the chat. I can answer these, happy to answer these orally while people work on the Padlet as well. So I'll try to answer the questions in the chat here, just starting from the bottom. And if you put them on the Padlet as well, then I'm sure I'll get to them now or later if I miss it. So Tom asks, some projects, students have to go places to get information and other stuff. They need a budget. Where can we find the funds? Yes, this is always a challenge. And I think that's a very hard question for me to answer, because it is so dependent on context. If we have the funding that you might have within your institution is something I definitely wouldn't know. But I have definitely found that the amount of free information that is available online provides maybe not all, but quite a bit of what students would need. And the other place, if you're looking online and you're looking in the real world, so you're exploring locations in a city, often that is, it's free to go somewhere and take a picture, to visit a park, to visit a place in a city, a neighborhood. And yeah, I think there's a lot of options within the free realm, and then it's very institutional on whether we can find a budget. Okay, moving up here. Hong asks, what do you do if students copy other language use on the internet? Yes. I've mostly worked in higher ed, where plagiarism is certainly a factor, but we have to really enforce rules. So I try not to accept anything that is plagiarized. But I know that sometimes it happens by accident. So, so when it does, we try to correct it and give another opportunity. The other point I would say about copying language on the internet is, if you have been really carefully working through a number of steps and checkpoints, you will probably have an idea who's going to copy and who's not. If students are reporting out every week or every couple of days on their progress, you might know who's really doing their homework and who's going to scramble online the day or two before something is due, and then submit something that doesn't match the or doesn't include any authentic language use. Okay, Tron asks a great question. How do you assess students' learning on projects, and can you share some assessment rubrics? Yes, I can. My email is available here, and I'm happy to share a few of the rubrics that I have used in the past. My preference is to have both an individual component and a group component. So the group would get a grade on the product, but the students would individually submit a number of things as well. And then you can play with the balance of those two grades, maybe moving the group. Often the group grade would be higher, but you have to complete the individual steps as well. And I would be happy to share over email some of the rubrics that I've used. Earlier, Han asked if I've missed some information before, but what framework do you use for designing your project? Yes, the citations, the references here include a number of great articles. The Allen and Stoller from 2005 is what kind of got me started 5 or so years ago with this, and it breaks it down just step by step what you would have to do to implement this approach in an English as a foreign language context. So that would be my basic framework. But then there's been a number of a lot of scholarship over the last decade or so, in particular, exploring the theory behind this and the question of whether it works. Okay, switching over to the Padlet. I can type some answers to a few of these as we go. If anybody wants to just jump in with a question, please feel free. I'm glad that I didn't go over time, so we have time to do this. So ideas for projects for young kids class. Yes, I think in general, when your learners are younger, and I don't have a lot of experience with younger learners, mostly I've worked in higher ed, but the general move I see is from very concrete and personal topics to more abstract topics. And so the younger the student, the closer you want to bring it to the student. The study I mentioned at the beginning from junior high school students in Indonesia centered on the family. So that is something that every kid will know very in depth, and they will be able to share, and they would want to share about it. So making it very personal, that could include holidays, family, activities, sports, possibly even food, but things that they are firsthand experiencing, I think is the key. And then you try to tie them somehow to what you're doing in class so that there can be some recycling of vocabulary and grammar structures. Sumi, do you recommend your students provide a reference list? Yes, yeah, typically, if there's research involved, I'm very interested in where they have gone. And in some higher ed situations, that's a formal APA citation. But things are changing so fast now that often references are, they're not articles or books, but they're websites or YouTube videos. And I think even now you can somehow reference a TikTok video in a formal academic context if you need to. So it is, the norms are changing, I think, a little bit, certainly from when I was a student, but I always do want to see where they got their information from. So there's a good question here. Is task-based learning similar to project-based learning? Yes, yes. I think the way you could think of it is project-based learning is essentially task-based learning plus content-based learning. It takes from both of those. So the biggest distinction between task and project-based learning, I think, is that a task can probably be completed within one or perhaps two class periods. But a project would include multiple tasks. It may have 5 or 6, 11 or 52 discrete tasks that lead you towards that larger goal. It also has the element of content-based instruction because students are going out and they are trying to work with some content outside of their textbooks. How do you decide the team members? That is a great question. I have always been a fan of allowing students to pick who they work with. I know that doesn't apply particularly well in every context, but I do find that that if groups can come together on their own, and if students can work with the people in class that they're familiar with, that can help. And in particular in an online environment where they may have to be collaborating through phone or social media, it can be really difficult to connect certain students. But if they already are friendly, I think it's easier and sometimes the work ends up better. I'm glad that this was helpful. Thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, asking the principal for an area to display their projects. Yeah. It makes a lot of intuitive sense. If more people at school or in the community are going to see it, the students are going to be, I think, more motivated to do it. Great question here in the chat from Farshid. Have you ever had to tell very active students to stop being so active and let others do the work? Yes, yeah. And I try to, I think, proactively take care of this by being pretty explicit about certainly how much speaking time group members should be completing, and really trying to call on all of the group members as they're sharing out their progress to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. But you do sometimes get that really capable or really active student. And the other thing I have tried to do with them is just to pull them aside and have a quick conversation. Tell them that they are doing excellent work, that they're a star, and try to get them on your side and point them towards more of a leadership role, so they can somehow manage the group a little bit more than just do all of the work. And I think when students hear that they're doing excellent work and they're being informally nominated as a leader in some way, that can be really motivating for them. And if they have the language ability, then they can actually go back to their group and just help administer and organize the work rather than just doing it all on their own. Here's in Teal, we have a great question. How can you give, how would you apply PBL to help students prepare for extensive grammar tests? It would be very hard, I think, to apply this to the explicit practice of grammar, because we do move fundamentally from a language-focused area to a content and communication-focused. I don't know of most of the studies that look into the results of project-based learning don't explicitly mention gains in grammar, but there is some intuitive. It makes intuitive sense that if you are engaging, if you have comprehensible input, you have meaning-focused output, and you have negotiation, that grammar should develop. That said, one idea comes to mind. That the project could somehow be related to grammar. There would be a way of perhaps sending students out to interview other students about methods for studying grammar, ways of improving their grammar, and they could present essentially on the method of study or the way to improve your grammar, and in that process perhaps acquire some skills that would transfer over to a test. But a very difficult task indeed. Producing the Google site for ways to improve speaking. Students can work together and then present their findings. Yes, Google's amazing. All of the tools there. And just displaying work on a Google site is pretty much free and really an easy and helpful way to get it out there to the world. Peer feedback. How can students give feedback on their peers' work during the project without creating group conflicts? This is a hard one, and I think it is largely a function of maturity. But I have always, when they are evaluating their peers, I collect that, and I don't actually say who said what. I keep some level of anonymity there so that students don't know that their friend gave them a bad score. And I haven't seen too many conflicts, but again, it is you do need a reasonably mature group of students to be able to have them evaluate each other successfully. Okay, great. There's only a couple minutes left. If anybody has final questions or any word from our moderators, I am happy to try to answer, or I'm available beyond this. What I can do now is just share. My Gmail is on the screen there, wklewis55@gmail. You can find me through the Viet TESOL website. The slides will be online. The presentation is recorded, so I think it's viewable beyond today. And I would be happy to share rubrics, assignment sheets, anything related to this that anybody would need. You'll also see on these slides that the studies I reference are here at the end. The article at the top there, I mentioned a few times, that's the Allen and Stoller that provides a great and very concise introduction to this framework for teaching. So thank you all again. I hope the next time we do this, it is in person, but it's my pleasure to do it online too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for your great presentation. I and also the participants have learned a lot from the information you provided, and maybe in the future we will apply the tips related to the project-based learning in our classroom. And for the last moments in the class, I would like to have some photos with the participants. And so now, can anyone and please turn on your webcam and we will have a photo session together. You can give the heart icons to our speaker. You can use the icon in the toolbar like this. Okay, and you can type into the chat box number 1 if you think that his presentation is wonderful and helpful for you. Yeah, I can see a lot of number 1s. You're great. Okay, yeah, so maybe almost everyone have been ready. And now I will count. Yes, 1, 2, 3. Just wait a couple of seconds and I will take this another one. One more, please. Okay, another pose. 1, 2, and 3. Beautiful. Okay, thank you very much. And that's it.